What is going on, Comic Fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by comic creator Andrea Molinari. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you are. I know you do stuff in editing. You are a writer. We're talking about two of your books, The Shepherd, and these are, I believe, they're offshoots of your main book, right? Because you got, this is the Valentine and the Pit, but you have a main series that you kind of have done sub stories off of, correct?
Right, right. The main story, the main book is entitled The Shepherd, and the volume that I sent to you was actually the third volume in the series. We've got the fourth one actually coming out in March 2023.
Oh, nice.
But the third one is kind of a step back because it deals with the children of the main character. So
Okay.
it kind of like focuses on the wider family.
Yeah. I'm so excited to jump into this world that you've created because that was my first exposure. And I was talking to you messaging wise. I'm like, I need to go back and and check out the others. But I found interesting is having no knowledge of the previous stuff. It did not affect my appreciation for the story of the Valentine. Like I was able to dig into it and go, man, this is some good stuff. For sure.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, originally, when just I should take a step back and say that The Shepherd is kind of a family. It's about a family and
Yep.
it's created by a family. So, my oldest son, who's 29 years old, his name is Roberto, and Roberto is my co-creator for The Shepherd. And in this set that you read in volume 3,
Yeah.
there's actually a backstory in there called The Pit that my
Right.
daughter, my daughter actually helped write,
Oh,
and my
nice.
son actually slid into the editorial role for that one. So that was kind of fun, getting her perspective on how the story should be told. Because the overall story of The Shepherd, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but the overall story of The Shepherd actually began with a nightmare that I had about my family.
Okay.
Okay, so its origins are in this nightmare, this catastrophic event that occurred to our family, and all of us were impacted by it. So I had
Yeah.
3 children. My oldest, Roberto, that I mentioned, my daughter, who's the middle child, and then my youngest son, Nico. And so what you read in the Valentine is
Yeah.
actually about their first adventure. Lexi and Nico are the main characters in that
Mm.
story arc, and also in the Pit. So when I envisioned this, I said I would really like to create like a separate onboarding, place where a reader could get into the world through this story. There would be enough there in the Valentine
Mm.
to kind of introduce you, get you situated in terms of
Yeah.
what has happened to get us to this point, and then hopefully, if they liked it, that they would want to go back, and see what those other 2 stories are dealing with. But it was definitely a lot of fun because it's a different tone, slightly different tone than what we were doing with the first 2 volumes.
Yeah. So, well, if someone's new to this world that you've created, what is the premise of The Shepherd? Because I think that sets the stage then for moving
Yeah.
forward with Valentine and the Pit. And
Okay, so like I said, the Shepherd is based on that nightmare, and in that nightmare, I had actually dreamed that my oldest son, Roberto, the one who's my co-writer, that he'd actually died of a drug overdose. And Roberto and I have been very close. I mean, always very close from the time, like I have a doctorate. I was working on my doctorate. He was born in 93, and I was working on my doctorate from 90 to 96. So when he was 2 years old, and I'm not making this up, when he was 2 years old, he was literally going around saying, I can't play with you. I've got to go write my dissertation. He was literally mimicking what his father had been saying to him,
wow.
So he was kind of my sidekick from
Yeah.
the time that he was born. I was taking care of him. I'd literally put him down for a nap and then go read a scholarly article, start taking notes when he got up from the nap. So in that close relationship we had, I had this nightmare, and losing him was just devastating. And the terrible thing about the nightmare was it wasn't that I just dreamed that it happened, but I dreamed that it happened, and then I dreamed the events that followed. So like identifying his body in the morgue, the seeing him for the first time in the mortuary,
Yeah.
nurse, the funeral home, at
Yeah.
gravesite, the aftermath, the mourning, the unable to wrap my head around it kind of thing. And so it was like this. I describe it all the time as it was like being on this horrible roller coaster that you don't want to be on and that you
Yeah.
cannot get out of. You're strapped in and you're going to be on this ride until it ends. And I woke up, sweating profusely, very shaken. And my wife, beside me, she's like, well, what's going on with you? What is wrong? And I said, I don't think you really want to know. She
Yeah.
was like, yeah, well, I think I do. And I told her, and her first response was, I hate you. Why would you tell me this?
I
Like,
told you, you didn't listen.
because you made me tell you. Well, it took me literally 2 days to get to the point where I could talk to my son about it, because I'm worried that it's some kind of a portent or
Yeah.
some kind of catastrophic kind of foreshadowing of what could come. Anyway, his whole reaction to it when I told him about it, he was like, Dad, this is so cool. And I was like, no, not really. This doesn't really. So I think
That's
of
not
what
what I would
cool
correlate with.
yeah, this is not really it. So, but he was determined from the beginning that this needed to become something and that he had in his mind, because we'd always, we'd been comic book fans. I took him to the comic book store, played HeroClix together and all that stuff. And he was determined. He said, Dad, this could be something, and he pestered me. And eventually we, to get him off my back, we wrote it out. We wrote this,
Yeah.
and this would have been June of 2011
Okay.
that this happened. And eventually we got an artist, and the rest is history. But that core story of which basically involves the death of a child and a man going into the afterlife, in the Greek myths, going into the Hades, going into the afterlife after his son to try to rescue him. That's the core. And that's basically the story that you would read in volume 1 of how that happens and the results of that search. But in his core, what the shepherd is, if you were to say, what is the shepherd? The shepherd is a guide of souls. He is a guide of souls in the afterlife. I tell people this, we basically tell ghost stories, as you now know from having read the Valentine.
Yeah.
We tell ghost stories. And so we encounter souls that need help moving on. And I've always been fascinated with those kinds of ghost stories. Like, those are my favorite horror stories, because they're smart. They have a rationale, for me, I never could get why, like, I was never interested in like Friday the 13th or Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street, because I was like, okay, let me see if I get this straight. You can't kill him. You can't stop him. You can run away, but you're just going to die tired.
Right.
I'm like, nah, I'm going to just stand here.
Yeah.
What's the point? So, but for me, those ghost stories where there's actually a reason that you find out, you find out why the ghost is there. And then once that's resolved, the ghost is able to move on. To me, that's a very satisfying story. And those are the kinds of stories that I would really enjoy telling, so that's kind of what we're doing with the shepherd in a nutshell.
Well, it makes sense, because like reading the Valentine, like it's a tough story, because of the topic and subject matter that you're dealing with. And you're like, oh my goodness, this is a gut punch, as I'm sure as that nightmare was for you as a father, and as I have kids, and like, so it puts things in different perspectives now, and you're like, man, that's tough. But then like, you're like, okay, there better be a satisfying conclusion here, otherwise I'm gonna be really mad you made me take this journey.
Yeah, I mean, we take people to dark places, and you're going to laugh at this, but believe it or not, the Valentine was originally intended to be a children's story. And I was like, I got halfway into it, I was like, well, that's not going to be a children's story. The intentions were good, Originally, part of the reason why it has that natural onboard is that my son and I were actually talking about calling the series, doing a spin-off series of The Shepherd called The Shepherd Junior, and when we brought it to Scout, especially Black Caravan, the horror imprint for Scout, they said, no, let's keep this all together. Let's, move forward with this one thing. And
Yeah.
you can tell stories that can all be part of the bigger picture, but tell stories under that banner.
Yeah.
And so that's, but I don't regret it. I'm really glad that that people can read that book and just, and get an entree into the series without having to feel like they have to read everything else.
Yeah. You mentioned about how this is kind of like an on ramp to your series. I want to kind of go back to a little bit of what on ramped you into comic books. And was it, you said you go to the store with your son, you played the Hero Clicks. Did you always have an affinity for comics, and then that you instilled into your kids? Like,
Yeah, I did when I was young.
okay.
And so like, I can remember my dad taking me to back when I was a child, you'd buy your comics at the pharmacy.
Yeah.
At like you'd go there's a spinner rack. They always talk about the spinner rack. This would have been in the early 70s.
Yep.
Early to mid 70s.
Okay.
So that was always exciting for me. I mean, I loved, one of my favorite titles when I was a kid. I grew up being predominantly DC, but I would read Marvel.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Daredevil, like Spider-Man, the Hulk, like everybody else. But I remember because we didn't have a lot of money, like for me, I had to pick carefully about what books I was, because my dad would let me buy one or two comics, So one of the titles that I loved the most as a kid was Brave and the Bold, DC's Brave and Bold, because, you would get Batman, but oftentimes he'd team up with somebody like Green Arrow, which was somebody I loved. I always loved Green Arrow. And then they typically have like a backstory,
Yeah.
a short backstory starring somebody like the Atom or the Elongated Man or, some Dr. Fate or, and that was like the best thing as a kid, so that was my kind of roots. And of course I grew up watching, Burt Ward and Adam West,
Right. So good.
So that was my kind of like my introduction to the superheroes. But as you got older, if you ever wanted to have a girlfriend, you better not be, reading any comics, and it's different now. I assure you.
It is different now,
very
but
different. But I guarantee you, in the 80s when I was in high school, if you wanted to not get a date, the best, surest way would be to tell a girl that you read comics. That would be a great way to make that happen. You wanted to be celibate, that's the path, baby. I kind of walked away from comics. You kind of get older and stuff, but my freshman year of college, which would have been fall of '85. I met, actually, excuse me, this would have been fall. It would have been my sophomore, I think, sophomore year of college. But the guy who was next door to me, he was from Rhode Island and really nice guy. We hit it off as friends and stuff. And he was like, he's like, do you like comics? And I was like, well, I used to, back when I was a kid. And he's like, well, why don't you try this? And he gave me this Batman story. It's called The Dark Knight Returns. And after reading that, I was back. I was like, holy shit. This was,
I'm in.
Yeah, I was like, what the, because I mean, I think most people who have read The Dark Knight Returns know how powerful it is, but you need to understand, like, if you grew up with a Batman like, Adam West, and then the Batman of the early 70s, which, if you go back and read those comic books of Batman in the early 70s, for the most part, like, he's meeting with Commissioner Gordon at the crime scene. Like, the police officer might hand him a cup of coffee. He chats with the cop, and now suddenly you're getting a look at a Batman who's a friggin' vigilante who the cops are trying to, either kill or bring in, which could be very much the same thing, and it made actually so much more sense to me. You're like, this kind of a person isn't going to be accepted by the authorities. He's not going to be welcome with open arms, and especially if it's a corrupt city. And he's challenging that. Are you kidding? This makes so much more sense to me. And, even the idea of a retired Batman, that he would have gotten to the point where he couldn't physically do it anymore. It just made so much sense. So, from that point on, it was kind of like the gateway drug where you're always looking for a high that will match that.
Right.
and that's kind of, that, so that right about in that, mid 80s is when I got back into it and then never left. So by the time my son came along in 93, my first son, I was very much, whatever little money I had from that wasn't going into my education was going to, buy comics and stuff like that. And when he got older, I would read him the little, because they had the Batman animated series at this point in the 90s, and then eventually the Justice League, and he loved that stuff. And they would have the comic books of those series too. And so some of the first stories I read to him were those.
Yeah. I love that. It's so good. Like we were talking backstage about Ollies and stuff, and one of the things I got, a Batman the Golden Age, is a thick book that I picked up for like $5 there, and I'm going back and I'm rereading some of those because there's a nostalgia for that, and I love because I grew up on Batman the Animated Series as well, so I guess you're bringing your kids into that, and I'm trying to do that the same with mine. And right now I'm introducing them to the Batman 66, and I'm like, you're getting the same treatment I got and then you're gonna get the other. So where did you make that transition though of I want to get into working in comics, then from your love for comics to then working in it?
Yeah, well, it was almost accidental, to be honest with you, because you got to keep in mind. So, like my educational background was that I have actually my doctorate is in early Christian literature and history.
Okay.
So my background is strong in literature, and it's very much in that Greco-Roman period. So I wasn't just reading Christian stuff, but I was reading, the Greek and Roman, like Suetonius, Tacitus, Pliny, Caesar, Polybius. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Plus, reading mythology, Greek, Roman, Sumerian, Egyptian, anything I can get my hands on.
Yeah.
Because I was a believer that the cultural context helped to explain the literature. If you like, even The Dark Knight Returns, for example, remember who's president in The Dark Knight Returns?
Yeah.
It's Ronald Reagan. It's written within that kind of context, political context, where it's very strong right wing, and if it's no accident that the ally that Bruce gets to fight Superman is Green Arrow. If you know anything about Green Arrow's history, it's not an accident that he would be on the outs and Superman would be on the in, in terms of politically in the period. So my point is that the cultural context matters. To understand literature, you have to understand the context. So that was something I was doing.
Yeah.
And my undergrad degree was also in theology, but I also did a double major in journalism. So I had a strong literature and then journalism, as the undergrad. So imagine that's your background. I'm teaching for 12 and a half years, mostly grad school, teaching literature. And when I eventually came to get into comics, when we went to get our book, the first volume published, we originally were published with Caliber Comics.
Okay.
So, and at the time that Caliber was run by Gary Reed, who helped bring in things like The Crow, and just, there's some of in the 90s, people like David Mack and Brian Michael Bendis and Ed Brubaker and Guy Davis. The list goes on and on of people that started there at Caliber. So they had shut down Caliber, I think it was like 2001, and Gary Reed started it up again in 2014. And I was part of that initial group that was part of that second wave.
Okay.
So this is kind of a long-winded answer, but in the process of talking with and working with Gary, I volunteered my services to help with submissions. Because I said, my literary background, and he was a college professor too. He taught biology. So he understood, my background. So he ends up giving me the opportunity to help him evaluate submissions. So that's what we did. I started it that way as a volunteer. And then eventually, one of the things I did is and this was the teacher, I guess, in me, but I saw submissions that came in that were really good and some that were really bad. And those were really obvious to know what to do with those.
Yeah.
But I also saw submissions that came in that if we did this and this, it could be really good. It just needs to be relettered, or it needs a good editing, or it needs some help with, it's got a hole in the story that can be fixed in this way. And so I began making those suggestions to Gary, and he would give me the book to work with. He'd say, yeah, we'll go ahead and sign them, provided you kind of work with the book and do X, Y, and Z, what we agreed to do. So that was how I got started as an editor. It was purely as a volunteer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And what ended up happening is, as an editor, I began transition from submissions editor to project editor to now I was going out to the comic book conventions and representing Caliber. And that's how I met Scout. The more we talked, because I'm here in Florida, and of course Scout is in Fort Myers. I'm in West Palm, they're Fort Myers. We'd bump into each other all the time at, MegaCon and Tampa Comic-Con and et cetera, et cetera. The more we talked, the more we felt that there was a lot of shared, common ideas and kind of rationale of how to approach this stuff. And so at the end of my contract, of my first 5-year contract with Caliber, my son and I talked it over and decided, to go ahead and move to Scout. And that was in 2020. And it's really been a great move for us. And when I came on, James Hake, the president, he kind of had already sized me up he wanted me to head up the editorial process with Scout. So I became editorial director.
Nice. So what does editorial director then entail for you, over there at Scout?
Well, it's a healthy amount of admin, as you would expect, but it's a lot of, click with the pen and working in the books too. Mm-hmm. I have either finished or am in the process of working with over 140 Scout IPs.
Oh, wow.
And that's just since 2020. So, there's a lot of that where you get in there and, and each submission comes in a different state. Some of them, they give you all you need is 6 finished pages to make a submission to Scout.
Okay.
So you might not even have a full script for issue 1 yet. You just have an idea and these finished 6 pages. And so you might come in that way. It could also go another way. Like today, I was given, we have a book called The Impure, and it's kind of like a manga sci-fi book. Very good. And it's done by a creator named Rolf Singh. He's a German. And he sent me, just this week, volume 2. And I hadn't seen anything in volume 2. He just literally dropped, it's like, hey, here's volume 2. And what he had is the completed art pages on one side of the document and then the script in the other. And he wanted me to, before he lettered it, he wanted me to clean that script up, to work on that script. Yeah. So you're doing lots of different things. So you're looking at how the characters developed, the logic, story logic, plot, character development, all that stuff. And then of course your grammar and your, eventually you're judging the lettering. And so there's a lot of like hands-on, up to your elbows in dirt, working in the actual books, which is the best part of the job as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Because it's that creative energy that you can imagine, and you think about this. I would compare it like when you were a kid getting to go over to a friend's house and playing with their toys, right?
Yep.
It's brand new toys, you get to play with them, and it's just really cool, and you get to help somebody else. You get to be a fresh set of eyes. And you really make some friendships. That's the amazing part about it. You really start building these friendships with these guys because they learn really quickly that you're there just to help. It's editing for a small press is very different than editing for Marvel or DC, because like with Marvel or DC, you have a brand. You have a brand that you have to protect. So in other words, if you were the writer and you're going to write Spider-Man,
right,
I would tell you as the editor that, there are things you can do and things you can't do. And if you want to do something a little out of the ordinary, we're going to have to run that up the chain of command and get it approved, because they're not going to let you do certain things with that character. It's too much of a moneymaker. But with a small press like this, most of our titles are creator owned. So that means, the creator has a lot of freedom. And so like when I first meet with you as the writer, I would tell you, I view that there are 3 things that we'll interact with regard to your story. There is going to be your grammar and punctuation, and I want you to trust me to follow me on that. With regard to lettering style, Scout uses and tries to follow the Blambot style guide that you can find at blambot.com. And it also has a book here by Nate Nate Pecos. I have him. I use it all the time. It's kind of my
Oh,
Bible
nice. Yeah,
for
yeah,
this kind
yeah.
of thing. So with regard to lettering, I want you to follow my lead as well, although we can discuss it. If you want to do something that breaks the rules, I'm open. As long give me a good reason to break the rules. Not
Right.
let's not be sloppy about it. But if you want to break the rules and you have a logical, creative reason to do it, okay, we'll do it.
Yeah.
The third category, so you have grammar and punctuation, you have, lettering, and then the third category is creative matters. And in creative matters, I will make suggestions. That's it. I won't order you to do anything.
Yeah.
I'm going to suggest ideas to you. And what I find with the creators is that takes a big load off their chest because they're like, oh, he's not trying to control my baby. He's not trying to take my baby away from me. He really is just trying to give me ideas. So I might give you 100 ideas. You don't have to do anything with any of them.
Yeah.
But now knowing that you don't have to takes that weight off your shoulders where you can now examine them and say, well, maybe I won't do this completely, but I could do this, and that give and take, I've had them say repeatedly that they really enjoy it, because rarely do you have somebody who is going to be able to give you that kind of feedback, because a lot of times when people read your stuff, if they're family or friends, those are the ones most likely to read it. They're going to be nice to you. They also maybe not even comfortable giving you any kind of critical feedback because they don't want to hurt your feelings, But an editor is just going to tell you what he thinks or what she thinks. And the intent is only to help you, not to offend you or hurt you. Because, I view all my creative teams as friends and colleagues,
Yeah. How was that transition then for you as someone who's writing obviously in the Shepherd, and you've already said it's a family ordeal though, of like doing it, your son's on board, your daughter was with the backup story. Like, how does that affect with the editor role of like when you are collaborating with your family?
Yeah, it's good. I enjoy it. We need to have somebody give us a fresh perspective because, when you're writing a story, there's a lot in your head that never makes it to the paper.
Yeah.
And some of that's just fine that it doesn't make it to the paper, doesn't need to, but some of it does, and you need to have somebody be able to read it through and say, well, okay, there looks like there's a kind of a jump here. Well, how did you get from here to here? And you're like, oh, well, this is how that happened. Well, it's like, okay, that's not perfectly clear. I see it now that you've told me, but could we do something to kind of enhance that so the reader is led along more clearly? And that helps, having that fresh set of eyes. Because after, anybody will tell you after you've worked on something, I'm sure the same thing with you as you're editing a video. At a certain point, you've looked at it enough, you're like, for the love of God,
I'm done.
just be done,
Good enough is good
done,
enough.
Good enough for government kind of thing. Yeah. So having that is really good, and I like my son and I actually, and my daughter, quite frankly, we went to New Orleans for Fan Expo New Orleans this past weekend. And my son and I were driving back, and we spent a good deal of time kind of going through plots and ideas, and it was just interesting to me as we were talking, because I was thinking how easy this is to have this exchange with him, because neither of us feel like our way has to be the way. It's like, give me a better idea. I'm not offended. It's like best idea wins.
Yeah.
And it's not even a matter of winning so much as it is saying we both recognize that we both want what's best for the title, for the story, to make it the best story we can. And once you can get that pride, get past that pride, you find that working with somebody else can be very fun.
Is that so? I know, we started off the interview talking about the Valentine, and I want to kind of bring it back to that. Is that kind of the process when you're thinking of these sub stories in this universe that you're creating I know you said it started as almost a children's story that you're creating. Yeah. Are these conversations that do you have with your son? Like, how did the ideas originate of like, this is a story we want to tell, of the ghost story aspect in this universe?
Well, I'll give you an example. My daughter and I really enjoyed doing The Pit. And the basic idea of The Pit, for those of your viewers, it's the backstory. So for volume 3 is made up of 3 issues story arc of the Valentine. and then it has The Pit, which is just a one-shot 25-page story. And I said, Lexi, I'd like you to write, do a short story with me about yourself, your character, and your little brother's character. And she's like, fine, but it's got to have lots of dogs in it. And I'm like, what? We love dogs. We're definitely a dog family. That doesn't mean we're anti-cat or anti any other animal. It's just that we really like dogs. So, and dogs appear, as you know,
right,
in all of our stories. Every volume has dogs that play important roles. And so I was like, oh my God. Well, I said, well, what do you mean by a lot of dogs? She said, as many as you can pack into the story. And I was like, come on, man. What am I supposed to do? So
that's when you bring on your son to edit the book, like you said, so that he can be the bearer of bad news. Like, we got too many dogs.
I was just like, you got to be kidding me. And I'm like, I don't even know what that's going to be. So I said, well, it's got to have lots of dogs and it's got to be something bad. So I just, several days it's rattling around in my head. I think I went out on a run, and I get some really good ideas when I'm out there running. And I was out there running and I was like, wait a second, what about something about dog fighting? Because you'd have lots of dogs, it's like this idea of this dog fighting ring, and you'd have lots of dogs, and it would have that kind of like like a horror aspect to it. Mm-hmm. I said, well, what if it's a ghost dog? What if it's the dog that died in the dog fighting pit, which is where we got the name. So that's the story I pitched to her. I said, well, what do you think about this? And she's like, oh, I think that'll work. So we got to work, Berto, and I remember Berto and I sitting right here at this computer side by side, watching videos on YouTube and stuff like that about dog fighting from humane societies perspective, from law enforcement, reading articles and stuff like that. And quite frankly, between us, I will tell you that I was horrified. I mean, I never realized, and I've never seen dogs fighting other than, dogs, neighbor dog not getting along with this dog kind of thing. I certainly didn't know anything about dog fighting. And the more I studied it, I was like, oh my God, this is horrific. Yeah. Because I mean, they file the teeth of these dogs to be sharp. If you've ever seen those dog fighting dogs, like, how they have short ears, how their ears are cut real short, they do it so the other dog can't rip off their ear. There's nothing to grab onto. And the shorter the ear is, the more intentional that they have plans for that dog to be a fighter. So there are giveaways like that. That's why you're cutting them that short. Just learning a lot of different things like that. And the connection between the guns, illegal guns, and it's rarely is dog fighting just being done by itself. There's other criminal activity that is related to it. So anyway, as you started, we started talking about that. And then once we had this plausible, villain, plausible bad situation, that's when, Lexi and I started talking about how would the story proceed? What would they do? What would happen in the story? And we just started throwing ideas, literally sitting in a room, with sodas and chatting back and writing down ideas, and then saying, okay, well, that's all I can get right now. And then coming back and doing it repeatedly until we had the skeleton of a story, and then sitting down and starting to write it.
Yeah.
So,
I feel like we could sit and talk about comics forever because this has been so much fun. I want to ask, twofold question. One, if people are listening to this interview and they want to at least get the Valentine or the Pit or even follow up stuff, where's the best way that they can find how to get these books?
I would recommend go right to Scout. Right. Scout, www.scoutcomics.com. That's a great way you can get any Scout books that you ever hear about. The fastest way to get them is there, because your local shop may have them, or they may not, or they may have ordered them and they may be sold out. So, the fastest way to get them is that way. In the case of both the Valentine and the Pit, as well as the other two stories, the first one is The Shepherd Volume 1, and then second is The Path of Souls. You can also get them on our website, theshepherdcomic.com, and you could get autographed copies if that's something that you wanted. That's how you could do that. but Scout is probably your easiest way. They'll ship it to you, and they also do sales, periodic sales. So if you wait for the half price sale, you can get them at a really good deal. So
I wait for that Black Friday sale every every
you
November.
don't even have to wait for it because they do it, pretty. I don't know how often they do it,
Yeah.
but like they do it for like different holidays. Like they did it for Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, they had a sale. And of course they did your Black Friday sale.
Yep.
And they also they're very active. Scout's very active on Whatnot. So you can also get some really good deals for slab books or trades or, whatever it is you're looking for. They have multiple shows every week. So that's
For
a great
sure.
way to do it.
You mentioned also at the beginning, you got some more stories coming out from this universe here soon.
Oh yeah.
Sounds like. So and you said in March?
Yeah, well, in March, I think it's late March is when the issue for one comes out.
Okay.
It's called The Tether, and this one focuses on the oldest son in the family, the one that dies of a drug overdose in the first volume and is in the afterlife. And it's kind of like him dealing with the realization that there are many things that are natural in life and normal in a person's life, falling in love, forming relationships, following a career, all these different things that are not possible. They're not going to happen for him, and him really not dealing well with that.
Yeah.
And so that then the events that occur after that, I'll give you a hint. It involves a girl, positively, in a positive way. So that's kind of we're really excited because it's very different than anything. That's something we try to do, is we try to have each of our stories be different, really different. So like this one's a love story.
Yeah.
The Tether is a love story. We really want to do that. We want to get that reputation for not being a one-trick pony, in the sense of that we're willing to do different kinds of stories.
Yeah.
Because our philosophy is, because the shepherd takes place in the afterlife, any person who's ever lived in any culture that's ever existed is fair game.
Yeah.
So
and so that comes out in March, and Scout still does where they do first issue and then 3 months or
that's called the nonstop.
Yep.
That's what we're doing.
Yep.
We've also done individual issues, like the Valentine's, obviously individual issues, as is the Pit.
Yep.
And we'll probably alternate back and forth.
Okay.
Because I know we've got a story that we're putting the finishing touches on. This is already for 2024. It's called The Burning Maid, and that one deals with Joan of Arc. And we imagine Joan of Arc as a monster in the afterlife. And so I'm really excited to see how people will respond to that one.
So where's the best place for people to follow along with you, so they can see what you're creating, stay up to date when stuff drops and things like that?
Sure. We are probably most active on Instagram.
Okay.
I'm terrible at social media, so I post a lot, but I don't know how effective it is. But that's where I'm most active. The Shepherd Comic.
Okay.
We also have, under the same name, The Shepherd Comic, also Facebook, and we are on Twitter, The Shepherd Com. Those are the three social media things that we use, and then, like I said, we have the website. But yeah, Instagram is the one that I seem to understand the best. I'll take any coaching we can get. Trust me. I'm still, I still don't understand any of this stuff with the social media. I just know you put things on there and people find them entertaining. And the big thing that I post a lot of, quite frankly, is because I'm an editor of so many different other titles, I really try to involve them in my feed as well.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of posts with regard to the traveling that I do. So like, if you were following my post over the weekend, you would have seen a lot of stuff coming from New Orleans.
Yeah. So cool. Well, thank you so much just for taking some time to talk about comics with me. It's been an absolute delight.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too. It's always fun. Comics are fun. They also will drive you crazy, but they are fun. More often than not, you're having a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
And you definitely meet some amazing people, some people with amazing talent. And like I said earlier in the conversation, I think one of the greatest gifts that I've received as an editor, is the opportunity to make friends across the planet. I mean, I jokingly say that I have so many friends in Italy that I could probably drink from the north to the south without any difficulty and without spending any money. Um, Probably in Spain too. I have a lot of good friends in Spain, wonderful artists in both those countries. But I mean, I have, in my list of creators that I work with, I mean, New Zealand, Australia, Brazil, some wonderful Brazilian creators. As I said, Spain, Italy, Croatia, Britain, France. The list it's a long list. Hungary. Yeah.
It
It's
sounds like we need to make a show where I'll do the videoing and you just take us around. We'll drink our way through
Oh
Italy and
yeah, I
Spain.
mean, if you're ever interested, let me help you introduce you to some of these people
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
a lot of them are very fluent. Like I had in the last 2 days, I had conversations with a couple of our Italian creators, and their English is just fine.
Yeah.
You would understand them no problem at all, and they're amazing, amazing creators with tremendous talent. And they're just fun to be around. And like I said, I feel that is a gift. It's a great gift the universe has given me because I feel like these people are like brothers to me.
Yeah.
And that's very meaningful.
That's so good. Well, gang, all the links are in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, they'll be in the description of the video. If you're listening on the podcast, same thing, description in there. Go check out these books. I think you'll really dig them. But with that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.